There is a sleeping giant in every human. Awakening those giants within and turning them into legends by helping individuals grab just what's out of their grasp is Brian Bogert's purpose in this life. Brian is a heart surgeon without a blade. He does not start outside with what you need to do. He starts inside with who you already are. In a world that is disconnected, Brian is revolutionizing how individuals, leaders, and entrepreneurs deeply connect with their authentic selves to achieve the best version of themselves. Brian, it's so great to have you on the show.
Man, I'm happy to be here.
I think we're going to create some magic in this episode.
It certainly feels that way, right? So I think we'll roll with it, man. If we get to rely on intuition and communicate and connect, beauty's going to happen, and what's meant to happen is going to happen, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, there's a word I learned from reading The Alchemist not long ago. It's by Paulo Coelho, and it's called Maktub, and it means in Arabic, it is written. So whatever ends up unfolding in this episode, it was already written.
Yeah. Well, and to then take it a step further, one of my favorite quotes from Ryan Holiday is, "There is no good or bad without us. There's the event that happens and the story we tell ourselves about it." So it will already have been written. And the reality of it is it's going to be good or bad only based on how somebody's going to put their own narrative on it. And so I think for us, it just gets to be and exist, and that's the beauty in it.
That's awesome. So what does it mean that you're a heart surgeon without a blade?
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't even heard that in a little while. People haven't actually used that terminology or attached to that in any way that they've introed me recently. But to be a heart surgeon without a blade, where that came from was actually one of my old teammates, somebody that worked with us and for us and was helping build our mission in the beginning stages. And after witnessing the ways that we entered into the world and having heard feedback in multiple cases, he started to literally tell people that what I do is I reach inside, grab someone's heart, pull it out, literally beat it back to life, and then put it back in a more repaired, better version of itself. But I never have to cut to get there. The reality of it is that what I genuinely believe that I do, and where that came from, is that I've learned that I'm just a really effective mirror for people. And I'm often the first mirror they've looked at that was completely objective and non-judgmental, but also a mirror that allowed them to see deeper into their selves and understand the trash that they've been carrying for a long time that's preventing them from actually moving forward in their worlds and being who they want to be before the world told them who to be. And so when that non-judgmental objective mirror gets held up, and people often have permission to feel or say something or to do something or to have words to articulate an experience that they've been existing in for a while without the ability to understand it, articulate it, at the end of the day, when that happens, that's freedom for people. And so we call it the heart in many cases because this is our rhythm of life. This is literally our heartbeat. But in reality, it's just helping people better connect their heads to their hearts and align their intellectual and emotional narratives so they can move faster through this world with less effort.
What's your view on suffering? Because I know that there's that quote, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional, something like that. So where do you see suffering in this illusory world that we're living in?
Either this is a really guided question because you know about our moniker and one of my core life lessons, or this is pure coincidence. Either one is beautiful. But I have a concept that I believe in, which is embrace pain to avoid suffering. And I think that's also where we gain freedom. Yeah. Right. And I think to understand suffering, we need to understand pain. And so one of the things I have to acknowledge to be able to answer your question effectively is that the world literally tells us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs. Right. It tells us to push through, show up with a smile on, feel less, right? Be happy all the time, not allow your emotions to be felt. And so every time we choose to push through, we also simultaneously push down. It's the pushing down that creates suffering, right? What we do as human beings is we also define pain as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something, and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. But then we put adjectives in front of it, like acute and chronic. Acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it because it implies it's no longer short-term, right? And it persists after the direct cause is removed. So what I'm imploring people to do is to recognize, let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is. Suffering. We don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices, but the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. And so to get ourselves into a place to avoid suffering, we have to learn how to embrace the pain to be able to alleviate that. Suffering to me exists because of four things. Internal suffering, which what I would argue is probably 90% or more of the world's suffering is internal, but it exists in four areas. Things left unsaid, the things we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or to understand, or the things that are left undone. So to fulfill my purpose in life, which is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs, all I'm doing typically, or by holding the mirror up to the clients that I work with, all I'm doing typically is giving them permission to feel or say something that they've never felt the permission to do or feel before. And I'm allowing them to have a deeper understanding and to put words to articulate the experience they've been existing in. But suffering doesn't have to exist. But it does require us to flip open the lid on our own trash can, look inside, and see what trash we've been carrying with us for the rest of our lives or for the past part of our lives. So it's not always pretty, right? But the only way to be able to breathe again and to get rid of the heaviness that so many people come to me feeling and experiencing is to learn how to take out our trash regularly and consistently.
So taking out our trash, what does that look like on a consistent basis? What are you doing to take out your trash on a daily basis?
Taking out trash, I think, has two paths. It can be processed deeply and actually healed through, or it can be real-time released by better understanding what's happening. I would argue that both are necessary for the second to be sustainable. But the reality of it is taking out the trash for me began with one of the biggest things I teach, which is really understanding the depth of what I'm actually feeling and understanding the alignment between my intellectual and emotional narratives. Right? It had to be understanding that I existed and lived in shame, which is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing because it masks itself as guilt and fear and perfectionism and control and anger and scarcity and all these other pieces that I could never really pinpoint even what it was. But then when I started to deeper understand shame and not only how it's showing up in my world, right, it would show up in a couple of different ways, right? One would be causing me to shrink down, making me feel less capable because people would say, Brian, you can't talk that fast. You can't talk that loud. Anybody who's been listening so far knows that those are both true of me. And I would all of a sudden feel not worthy and not capable or that my words weren't necessary. The other thing it would do is come out as anger and defense, right? Because I had to protect myself because I wasn't being seen, understood, and I wasn't being connected. And so, or because of the patterns of my past or the trash I was still carrying. So my wife, right, would ask a question. Hey, babe, what are we going to do with the kids this weekend? Totally innocent question, but my shame filter caused me to hear it this way. My trash connected to my shame caused me to hear it this way. Hey, babe, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father recently. So what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? And so then what would happen in that case? I'd feel the armor go up instantaneously. The anger would start to come out because anger is armor. And I would respond and react real time, hard and harsh and fast, which is rattling off the 10 things I've done in the last 3 to 4 days to demonstrate and prove to her that I was a good husband and father. Now all of a sudden I've created damage that I now have to go repair. I've created armor on her side. I had to learn how to process through all that, okay? And there's a deeper answer to understand the processing to escape the fact that I don't even get triggered in many of those situations anymore. But what most people understand is that our triggers are those moments that transport us to a moment that's not currently in front of us. It's when our wife tells us to take out the trash and all of a sudden we get angry because somebody's told us what to do and it reminds us of a chore we had when we were a kid and how our dad used to come down on us for it. It has nothing to do with the energy or emotion about our wife. It has everything to do with the trash and the patterns that we've been carrying with us. But so many people haven't allowed us permission to actually flip open the lid and take a look inside. Yeah. So the unpacking process is sometimes just even pausing and being able to ask a question. So how do I take out my trash regularly and consistently? For me, I try to do it as real time as possible now. So now if my wife asks me that same question or something that might trigger something, right, and I feel it, now that I understand what the feeling looks like, I understand how it's patterned in my world, I've done a lot of the healing through it, I'm more capable of this real time than many of my clients are when they first start. But point is, it's about progression and spending less and less time in those negative emotions because now when she asks something that triggers me, I understand it, I know it, and I immediately know my tendency, which is to push down the emotion I'm feeling, go to an intellectual narrative that's designed to protect, and often actually makes the situation worse. So I can pause. Now that I know that pattern and understand how that moves in my body, I can pause and either diffuse it and release it because I know it's not real by asking myself, is what I'm reacting to in this moment due to the prior trash and patterns in my life or what's right in front of me? Simply asking that question allows me to better understand, but because I've done the healing, I now can also release it real time because I know it's not my truth. It's not my narrative. Or if I don't get the ability to catch it in time, at least maybe I can catch it enough to say, hey, babe, you just triggered me. And I don't think it had anything to do with what you said. It probably had everything to do with how I received it. So can you please restate it so that I can hear it more clearly the second time? And if we can't move through this, maybe we can just pause and revisit it later when I can know I can have a more neutral energy and we can have a positive conversation. Thing is, for me, I can real time reconcile and take out my trash, or I can put things in the container to look at later. And so for me, it looks as twofold: real time and processing like that, with an example to re-empower through communication and connection, real time, so that the trash doesn't create more damage. Or I put it in my container for later. And at the end of every night, I can reflect on, now that I understand the patterns and I've done that processing work, I'm enabled to understand what were the moments today that made me feel like garbage. How did that feel in my body? And if I don't have a deeper understanding of what this looks like today, right now, at least it's pointing me towards something that how often do I feel like garbage this way? What I'm trying to employ everybody is, look, we take out the trash in our house every single day. We refuse to live in garbage, yet we accept and actually often don't even realize that we're allowing ourselves to exist feeling like garbage. I just want people to not have to feel that way anymore and to be more connected to who they are, who they're becoming, and who they're doing this for. And so by doing that, every night now, I go through this and I understand what was I actually dealing with in this day and what processing needs to be done so that I don't push anything further to be carried into the next day. And if I know it's connected to a deeper pattern or some level of healing that's not complete, then it allows me to give myself empathy and compassion because I recognize that I'm still growing and learning. But at least then I understand versus exist in this space, which I did for a long time, which was allow my intellectual narrative to fabricate a reality that wasn't real, and this need to defend and protect in so many ways that kept me further disconnected.
So you asked me before we started recording if I'm willing to be vulnerable in the episode, and I'm going to start, and I said yes, of course. I'm going to start being vulnerable right now by sharing. I got triggered last night by my wife, Orion. She asked me to promise her that I would get our little toddler David to bed by 8:30, and I got triggered. Turns out that after analyzing it, I got triggered by the promise me. Why should I have to promise that? And I didn't think that logically. It just was in my immediate reaction. And
Yep.
so I was cantankerous about it instead of neutral about it.
Yep.
And yeah, we got in an argument. But thankfully, I realized what I had done not too far down the track, and I apologized, and everything got resolved. So we didn't go to bed angry or anything like that with each other. But it was very instructive for me. Like, what is it about promising that I get triggered? Why does somebody insisting that I promise them trigger me? And I came to the conclusion that it feels like my word is not my bond unless I promise. And why can't you just trust me? Am I that untrustworthy? Am I that unworthy that you need the words I promise in order for my word to be valid? Like, it's just ridiculous when you're articulating it like this. It's like, that's just silly. But it was in these well-worn grooves in my brain of old patterns.
It's the trash you've been carrying with you, brother.
Yeah.
Right. And what you did is at least progressive enough in two levels, which isn't surprising, but it's steps that most people don't make in these situations. One, you reflected on it afterwards to better understand it and at least give yourself a narrative that led you down a level of questions that helped you see a pattern that exists. And second, what you call cantankerous also likely caused damage in some form or fashion. And so what you did was recognize that the argument, right, in and of itself creates damage because it creates this need to protect, this armor to go up for both sides. And again, we feel questioned or challenged, right? And so when there's an argument, inevitably damage can exist, and you sought repair to neutralize and diffuse or remove that energy that existed, potentially for both sides, just by simply owning it and communicating it. So I want to honor you on that for both levels. Thirdly, I want to honor you for your vulnerability because you took me there without even allowing a question to be asked in the beginning. Because of the string of the conversation, you just leaned in and you demonstrated vulnerability, and you sharing that story alone is identifiable, I guarantee you, for at least one listener, if not many. But what I'm curious about is, would you be willing or interested in going deeper on that?
Of course. Let's do it.
One of the first questions I would often ask someone who doesn't even know if they're carrying trash is, who was the last person who made you feel like garbage? And in this case, it was really clear. It was last night, right? You made that clear. It was an interaction with your wife, and that interaction. And so I don't mean to point blame towards her. And I want to make sure that when I say who was the last person that made you feel this way, it's not to suggest that it's their fault. Okay? It's the dynamic, because what was said is what made you feel this way. The next thing I want to ask is, how did it feel in your body?
I don't remember exactly which of these two body responses I felt, but it would have been one or the other. One is my chest feels really tight. It's like a compression in my chest, a tightness and a constriction. The other could have been that I felt hot or bothered, kind of physically uncomfortable that way. So it was either one or the other. I don't remember which one.
How quickly were you aware that you felt that?
It wasn't immediate. I don't know how long, but
Okay.
it took a little while.
But as soon as that feeling took place, it immediately went up to here, it sounds like, which was also then the why am I being questioned around, and why, like basically like, why do I need to promise this to you, right? Like almost just that's where the reaction and the contemporaneous type interaction is that you talked about.
Yeah, it was almost like it triggered some stinking thinking around, like, why would you even ask this? Like, why do I need
Mm-hmm.
to promise? Isn't my word good enough? It was a lot of stinking thinking that got triggered, and I didn't even realize what was going on. It was that fast until after the fact. I'm like, wait a second,
Yep.
this is just
Which,
ridiculous.
which is the definition of a reaction, like you had said. So the feelings that you described in your body are very common, and they're very typical patterns in a couple of different ways. And I'm not going to put you into a bucket of typical. We're going to get specific for you. But what I wanted to address, since we're in the purpose of the show, is that tightness, that heaviness, right? Often people feel the heaviness or the inability to breathe all of a sudden, the tension in the chest in some form or fashion, right? Even if they don't realize that it's an inability to breathe, it's like here in the chest. What you were able to extend upon is that you were also aware, because I don't think it was actually one or the other, I think it was both, where you then also felt a little bit of the boiling, a little bit of the raced heartbeat. And really, truly, that's where the resentment, frustration, and what I would almost call borderline, right? Anger type emotion, even though it wasn't an anger in the moment, was armor. Okay. It was the reaction to the need to feel the need to protect. And so here's the interesting part, and I'll ask another question. What I'm really curious about is, when have there been other times in your life, and I'm going to particularly ask you to look at pre-age 12, that you didn't feel like you were trusted, or that people had trust in you, your actions, or your words?
There was a time when I was in first grade. I came home with what was not exactly a report card. It was more like a little interim type thing that was maybe related to some homework assignments or something. I don't remember the details of it. All I remember is that the parent was supposed to make a smiley face to show that you did it. And when I took it back to school, my mother had made the smiley face. I got questioned and accused that I made the smiley face myself because it was that. My mother
Mm,
was left-handed. She didn't have very good handwriting, and so the teacher went straight to accusing me of cheating. And this was to get like a sucker or something like that, because you'd get some sort of lollipop or something. And I felt really ashamed about that. And
mm-hmm.
I went home again, explained the situation. My mother then wrote something on the card, but the damage had already been done.
Well, and so I won't get much deeper than that for today. What I would suggest is that was a situation that also triggered trash. It likely didn't completely create it, and so what that was a very clear understanding of where your word wasn't being trusted, and you were not being seen and understood in that environment, even though your intent, your actions, and everything was in alignment with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so the human experience, I think, is rooted into four things, right? We all seek and desire to feel safe. We all seek and desire to feel protected, and those are not the same thing. We all seek and desire to feel seen and understood, and we all seek and desire to feel connected. By the way, these last two don't happen unless the first two do. What's interesting is when we don't feel protected, we also inherently typically don't feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, what is our human tendency? To protect ourselves. When we protect ourselves, our armor goes up. And here's the really interesting thing about armor. We believe it's protecting us. It's actually taking us further and further away from what we really want, which is to be seen and understood and connected. Let's imagine it's an invisible force field. Let's just imagine it's a giant trash bag. And it's a 33-gallon black trash bag. Let's just call the fact that if we're going to protect our trash, we're going to protect it with a trash bag. If you hold that black trash bag out in front of you, can you properly portray who you are, your intent, what you desire, your true feelings and emotions, like the depth of your truth through that black trash bag? And can we expect that someone on the other side will ever fully receive us for who we are if we're holding up our own trash bag? What's interesting is we protect ourselves by putting up this armor, but what it really does is it takes us further away from being seen and understood, and it takes us further away from being connected. The other thing that often happens, my friend, and this is an important thing to really look at from this lens, now we're holding up a trash bag. But what's interesting is our armor also is often a trash bag filled with all the trash we've been carrying for years. So let's just say I give you a full trash bag. You just unloaded it from your kitchen. How long could you hold that there?
Hours.
Out in front of you for hours?
I'm kidding. Although I have started working out, so it's certainly longer than it would have been 2 months ago.
Dude, let's call it 2 hours just for the sake of what you said. I'm holding it for 2 hours, okay? But here's what I believe would happen through that. You'd probably feel it within 2 minutes. Yeah. And the longer you carry it, right, that the more you're going to feel the pain, the more you're going to literally suffer, and the heavier it's going to get. So not only does armor prevent us from getting seen and understood and being connected, but it also incrementally crushes us the longer we carry it, because it gets heavier and it gets stinkier the longer we hold it in front of us, which is no wonder why so many people say they can't breathe, why they feel heaviness and tension in their chest, right? Like legitimately, the trash is preventing you from being able to breathe. And so if we're going to hold it out there and we know that that's the case, okay, well, it's heavy. And just because it's heavy doesn't mean you can't carry it. But still, the point is, do we want all of that weight?
Nope.
The third thing that our trash bag does, our armor does, is there's really two kinds of people. And let's just correlate this to an analogy with a trash can for a second. We'll look at it a little bit different. But in our bag, there's typically open trash cans and there's trash cans with lids. There's also two types of people. There's people that wear their heart on the sleeve, and you always know everything that's going on, and it doesn't matter what it is. There's always just trash and garbage coming out from their world. And then there's people that are never going to let the world know they're struggling. By the way, the Latin word for suffer is to carry. So the other thing is we're suffering because of all the trash we're still carrying and the armor we're still carrying in front of us. Two types of people. I know I was the second one. Man, I was locked up. But there's only so much room in a trash can. There's only so much room in a bag. But every time we push through, we push down. We think we're creating more space. What we're really creating is more pressure. We're creating more weight. We're creating more resistance, right? And those that don't have a lid on the top of their trash can, or they never tie up their trash bag, so it just remains open, what happens? At some point, it can't hold anymore. So the bag's either going to break through the bottom or it's going to start spilling over the top. Either way, your own trash, your own garbage is now going into everybody else's world around you. Man, I had a lid on mine. I had a lock on mine. Mine was airtight and sealed. Nobody knew how much I was holding back. In fact, I suffered so much in times my parents didn't even know I was suffering. The people that brought me into this world didn't even know how much I was suffering because that lid was so tight. Well, now it's not just going to spill or break through the bag. It's going to literally be a container that builds perpetual end of pressure, and it's going to explode, sending shrapnel of trash and garbage all through your world, creating even more damage. Anger is armor. So one of the first things we can do, and one of the things I would say to you, is find a way to get in your body faster every time you do this. The faster you get into your body, the faster you can understand what to do with it. Because we all know what it feels like when we feel like garbage. And if we can pause long enough to understand how it feels in our body and the physiological responses, then we have a pattern we can pay attention to. For you, then, it also got a little cantankerous, as you called it. That armor went up and you even felt the blood boil, a little bit of the pressure. And like I said, although it probably didn't come out as a big reaction in anger, it was resentment, frustration, anger. Like, why are you questioning me? Why don't you trust me? Right? Anger is armor because it's designed to protect. And so often when we feel those emotions and those energies, it's just understanding that, okay, if I'm carrying this armor right now, is it actually getting me closer to what I want? To be seen and understood, to be safe and protected, or to be connected? And the answer is typically no. And so what do we do with that? Part of the way we take out our trash regularly and consistently is to become the protectors and connectors in every environment we're in. By being vulnerable enough and open enough that we don't need external protection and we can convince ourselves that we are safe. And when we can convince ourselves we're safe, we can lower our armor, and we have a really beautiful opportunity as leaders in businesses, in communities, in our families and life, to then become the protector by wrapping a layer of protection around everybody that's in that container so that everyone can be safe, everyone can be protected, everyone can be seen and understood, and everyone can be connected. Our trash literally gets in the way of having everything we want and being exactly who we want to be before the world told us who to be.
How did you come to find that being safe and being protected are two different things, or feeling safe and feeling protected are two different things?
Because typically we often feel that we're safe when we protect ourselves. And what I started to realize is I wasn't actually safe. I was terrified and afraid, which is the reason the armor existed. So many people convince themselves that they're safe by pushing through and pushing down. But what I started to recognize is there's also a lot of different people that I can be around. And at this point in my life and where I'm at in my careers and the things that we've done in the world, and I don't say any of this to impress, it's just to impress upon the point. More people want something from me than want something for me. Typically, we feel the need to protect when we feel like we're being challenged, when we're being questioned, when we feel like we're being asked to do something, or when we feel like somebody's just going to be a drain, right? Like, or they just want something from us. And so for me, the difference between safe and protected was when I started to surround myself with people on my team, people in my business, but also people that I'm running with and collaborating with. And I started to really pay attention to, do I want something from this person or do I want something for them? Do they want something from me or do I want something or do they want something for me? Even that alone started to point me towards the energy on the difference between carrying armor and not. Because those that want something for me, I feel safe and protected, right? I feel safe and protected. Those that want something from me, I don't feel protected. I do feel safe because I know myself and I know that I can isolate and set the appropriate boundaries because I've done a lot of the work. But when someone inherently wants something from me, how many times in a sales pitch, the first freaking thing out of the gate is like a question to try to highlight pain or create a gap or to show you all the reasons why what you're doing isn't working. Immediately, they have a path that they're guiding you down because they want something from you. They want your money. They want your sale, right? I even changed the way I approached sales 15 years ago because I decided that I was no longer ever going to sell. I was going to focus on relationships, value, and creating impact. And if I do that effectively and I can maintain a high level of intent, then the reality of it is that I can be safe in every environment and I don't need to protect. But again, the difference is someone who wants something from me, I don't feel protected by. Someone who wants something for me typically is going out of their way to protect me.
Yeah, that's great. What a great distinction. And the thing that really brings my hackles up, I don't even know the right word for it, but it puts me on full alert is I hear the phrase, "Can I pick your brain for a minute?"
I get a lot of those messages every single day. Can I buy you coffee and pick your brain for 5 minutes?
Can I just steal your juice? Like this,
and the reality of it is I have a belief that I want to give to the level that I feel it, right? Like my wife and I have this belief that we give until it hurts, meaning we give until we feel it. Now, that's something that's aligned for us that hasn't exposed us in too many situations. So there are still times that I will give because I desire and I want to, and not everybody can access me because of either their resources or where they're at in their life or whatever in a one-to-one perspective. But to your point, I also often look for people that look for an ability to at least exchange whatever value they are capable of giving without just taking.
Yeah, I love this analogy that I learned from my friend Amy Africa. She explains that there are three types of people. There are the juicy people, the juiceless, kind of dry people, and those that are the juice stealers. And the juice stealers are the ones that you most have to watch out for because they seem juicy. They've got all this great knowledge and they're dropping all these wisdom bombs and everything, but it's just other people's stuff that they've stolen and reiterated, and they're looking to do the same with you. And it's she had this analogy of they're walking around with a syringe tucked away, and they if you could imagine having your peeled orange stuck on your forehead, and it's either a juicy orange or it's a dry tasteless orange that that's the non-juicy people. And then there are those folks who have what appears to be a juicy orange on their forehead, but it's full of holes because they've been using their little syringe to extract your juice and everybody else's and then put it into theirs. And then they've got this leaky sieve of an orange that just leaks out all the juice. So they have to keep replacing it, stealing. And so those are the people that are like, can I buy you a cup of coffee and pick your brain? That's the sort of thing that you have to most watch out for because they're stealing your juice, and they're not only taking advantage of you, everyone else down the line is going to be negatively affected because they're using your amazing wisdom and brilliance as if it's their own with others to fool them. So don't play that game.
That's exactly right. And by the way, there's a lot of people in the world right now talking, very few people with anything to actually say. And so like, that's the other piece, is just pay attention to like who you're surrounding for, who you're asking for advice from. But I would always say, look to figure out where you can create value and impact in any relationship. And if there's meant to be a path, it'll develop. And that's just often what I look at. So, there's other terms out there. I love that analogy, by the way, the juice. There's feeders and bleeders, right? There's all these concepts. The other element that I didn't address that I want to make sure that people hear is the difference between being safe and protected is, am I in an environment that I'm going to be open to ridicule, judgment, and criticism? Or am I in an objective, neutral, and non-judgmental environment? Typically, as individuals, we do not like criticism. We don't like judgment, and we typically don't like to receive those feelings. And often it's because they are projections of the person putting them into our world, and they just trip one of our pieces of trash. Protected is when you're in an environment or with friends or with people who are always looking to build you up as well, not to tear you down. And so it's not just always the for and the from, though you can extrapolate this concept through the same idea. What I want to point out is that there are literally people that will help build you, and there are people that are going to drain you and cut you down because it makes them feel better. You are not protected if you are not in an environment that's neutral, objective, and non-judgmental.
Yeah, yeah. Love that. And reminds me of something I learned from Kabbalah, that you're either judging or you're loving. So you're in judgment,
yes,
or you're loving. And
yes,
when you are one, you're not the other. So it's binary. If you find yourself judging somebody, like walking down the street and you're judging a homeless person you see, know that you're not loving them right now. And conversely, if you're loving somebody, know that you've parked the judgment. It's really quite freeing because it makes it so simple.
Most of these things actually are, but like we like to do in this world, we way overcomplicate some of the most basic, fundamental things about the human experience.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, did you have a particularly difficult and a dark night of the soul where this is what launched you into this area of study and expertise?
I never had a singular night. I've had a lot of things happen and a lot of little moments and inflection points. What I'll hit on, because I think it's relevant to answer the question, is I think this has always been in me, but I was not always willing, courageous, or vulnerable enough to look at it. Really, it goes back a long time. I mean, when I was 7, and I'll expedite the story for the purposes of time today, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was completely severed from my body. Reattached, 24 surgeries. I pushed through and pushed down a lot. I created an intellectual narrative to protect myself, that I was good, I was strong, I was capable, I could do anything myself, because nobody believed my own story. I'm fast forwarding and going through this, but what I learned in that period of time was the power of our mental and intellectual narratives and the power of mental toughness, which I think is critical, but it's only part of the equation. Then I was 20 and I rebroke my arm and I almost lost it again. Went 10 months with it hanging by my side, went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of medical malpractice, and literally a bone loose and dangling inside my arm at any moment with the risk of me potentially losing it again. Now, all of a sudden, finding myself completely alone, navigating many of the same experiences I did when I was a kid, when I was surrounded by support and help with my family. I had lots of friends, lots of family. By the way, nobody was there. And I was, at the time, for a moment, angry and upset, but it didn't take long before I realized they just bought into the power of my narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, he can do anything himself, and if he's not, he'll ask for it. But what they didn't understand, and what I wasn't able to admit, is that I didn't have the courage at one of the most vulnerable periods of my life to actually ask for help. But I shifted that next period of my time, realizing that I wanted more human connection. So I focused on vulnerability and authenticity, which I think are the glue that binds human connection. But what did I do? I was really looking for who, and I chased the what, because that's what the world taught me. What I used to think was my revolutionary story, my like creation story, was my original accident. No, it just created a lot of trash that I pushed down that I was carrying for a long time. It was a mere broken bone that flipped the lid to expose what was inside. And it was only the beginning of it. So I got really good at vulnerability and authenticity, but I was really looking for more connection, more who's. And what did I do? I didn't have a good model of what vulnerability and human connection and interactions could look like. That doesn't say that I have bad parents. I've got phenomenal parents, right? But let's just call it what it is. We as a society aren't good at this. And so what did I do? I chased external validation and success. Pushed myself to a high performance. Over the course of the next 15 years, developed a $15 million business that I built with some partners and was riding on the top of the world. But at age 27, I had all the whats: what house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success. But it cost me the ultimate price, because it cost me the connection with who I was. And so that was an awakening moment for me to realize that I'm now running in circles with people making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures. I used to, even though it wasn't an intellectual process and thought, I used to believe that if I got to a position of prominence, people might admire me, just want to be around me, be in my presence, right? I was living the life that success was defined as. Yet all of a sudden I was still feeling like garbage and still feeling empty, still in need of who. Had more connection to emotion over that period of time, but I hired my first coach at that time. And within a month he said, Brian, you got to be doing this. I was like, well, yeah, what are you talking about? He goes, you need to be coaching and speaking. You do it naturally every single day. You're always helping people. Like, why wouldn't you formally go into this and actually commit your life to it? And I was like, yeah, whatever, dude. I'm paying you a lot of money, not to tell me how great I am, but to help me figure out these other things. But it led down another path of awareness, more vulnerability and authenticity. I did jump into the business, but it wasn't until like I was late 20s, early 30s. My daughter was 2 years old, laying on the couch. She reaches her arm around, kisses me on the cheek, says, Daddy, I love you. And I started crying, pure joy. What I didn't realize is that when I shut off physical pain, because it exceeded my ability to cope 25 years before that, I also shut off emotional pain, mental pain, and spiritual pain. And I didn't even realize it. Because if I'm experiencing joy this way, I'm certainly not experiencing fear, worth, despair, shame, anything else. In fact, now all of a sudden the narrative my wife saw, which was that I don't feel anything, started to become very, very clear, because I did believe I felt everything, because I always felt like garbage and chaos inside. We stayed in that space. I started to unpack this, but I realized that human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. So it changed the way I did everything. But it was 2019, after some other health stuff, that my wife and I went away for a weekend. It was one of those weekends that mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, like, bro, we were one. And as we're driving to pick up our kids, she leans over and she goes, how would you feel if you didn't have to go to the office on Monday morning? 5 years into running my coaching and speaking business side by side at this point. And I was flooded with fear, drowning in doubt, swirling in my shame. And I was like, babe, that's a pretty loaded question. Why don't you tell me more? And she went on to tell me that I allowed the status, the prestige, the money, the financial security to convince myself that I didn't have an option, that this was now what I was destined for, that this was the life that we needed. And she said, all we need is 100% of you, and we don't have it. I don't care if we live in a cardboard box in the corner. She said, I know you're barely scratching the surface of your potential, and I know you're barely having the impact on the world that you want and are capable of. So why don't we double down on the bet we've taken on you multiple times and go see what we can do in the world? That was the real moment that told me I was going to go all in, because there was a 3-month process that I had to take out a lot of trash myself to see myself clearly before I could fully lean in. But that was the final push, with the tops of the waves that I hit over the prior 25 years, that really put me in the position where I know without a doubt, and I now know after I've done it consistently, after executing the buy sell in my last business and doing this full time, after years of doing this now, this is exactly who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing.
Wow. Amazing. So imagine that you and your wife are going away for another weekend, and she leans over and she says something else to you. Now you've made some changes since the last time, 2019, right? What does she say this time?
18 months ago, we had one of those moments. We were sitting on the back patio, and mind you, I left the other world that I went into to bring more of myself into this world. I'm literally committing the rest of my life to helping other people deal with their trash and become who they are. And my wife sat down on the back patio and told me that actions, behaviors, and patterns that I had done early in our relationship had created trash and patterns in her that had caused her to lose who she was. Here I am 2 years into committing the rest of my life to be the best man and father I can be, and to bring this into the world. And the singular person I care most about got the other side of me. And what we started to unpack is, although I was very aware at that point about my shame, it was just 18 months ago I started to realize that I also was dealing with a really deep, dark level of anger, buried so deep it could barely be excavated. That was a moment that became very clear for me, because the only thing binary in my world, I love that you use that word, by the way, you don't hear binary very often, and I often say it in this context. The only thing binary in my world is that my wife and kids are the only thing that come above everything else we're doing. Meaning, if they are not good, if they are not feeling safe and protected, seen and understood and connected, if they are not understanding how to take out their own trash, if they're not feeling centered in who they are, empowered in who they are, absolutely seen and convicted in every single moment, then I'll walk away from everything else I'm doing. And so I took a 10-day window, right? Literally that day, I handed my phone over to my wife and I said, get with the team and clear my calendars. I'm not doing anything for the next 10 days, external. I went deep inside in 10 days. Now, I'm not telling you that it was fixed in 10 days. It's been an 18-month process of unwinding it. But the reality of it is we're now sitting in a position where she could still bring something to me like that. But I went from March of 2021 feeling that we were in the best place in our marriage we'd ever been, to the end of April wondering if I'd even be married by the end of last year. My true fear and my true existence of suffering almost became reality. I almost lost everyone and everything I cared about that was right in front of me, right there to grab and access at any moment because of the way I showed up in my house. Man, I think that I've dealt with a lot physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And that's not to say I've dealt with more than anybody else. But the depth at which I've gone in myself makes me know that I'm safe no matter what happens in my life. And I'm also extremely detached from anyone or anything at this point. Not that I don't care, invest, and am attached in a healthy way. But nothing, one thing or another, other than my wife and kids, is ever going to define me. And so it allows me to be open to receive whatever feedback she gives me. It allows us to actually have conversations and neutralize and diffuse generational patterns that we both inherited that went back 3 generations that we're now real time working together for the first time ever in business and in life to create the life, the family, the household, the business that is just a manifestation of who we are. Because we're just very clear now that we're chasing who. And the more we chase who, the more all the what's in our world are just a manifestation of who we are. And so that's how we get to move faster with less effort. But if she brought me something today, I'd listen. I'd feel it. I'd receive. I wouldn't defend. Because what I'm very aware of at this moment is that whether it's truth or not, perspective is her truth, at least in the current moment. I don't have anything I need to defend or protect anymore. I'm completely open, both in my household and external. And so it's just allowed me to actually exist in a lot more neutral but happy place where I'm super deeply connected to myself, her, and my kids.
That's wonderful. Do you feel like you have resolved all that deep anger, or is there something?
No, there's still stuff that I get triggered. And I want to be really clear here. I don't think that any of these emotions, any of this trash ever goes away completely. We just spend less and less time existing in it. Right. But I think they're adversaries in constant pursuit. Now, what I will tell you is I went 6 months with near perfection, knowing that I was the one that contributed all of her armor. I created her armor because of the way I showed up, the edge, the energy, the way I reacted. And so I had to eat shit for 6 months to regain trust that I could demonstrate to my wife that I could emote something other than anger, tension, defensiveness, or whatever. I let her just come at me without reacting. I'm proud to say in over 18 months, the negative impact of anger, which I promised her that day, I would do everything in my power to ensure that the negative impacts of anger would not happen in our house or result to me again, as much as I could prevent it. Never promised that it wouldn't happen because I'm human and I knew it would. But in 18 months, it's happened 4 times. And the damage has gotten less and less each time. And so, no, do I still get angry? Do I still get defensive? Do I still struggle with my shame? Yes. But what I want to point out is anger is not a primary emotion. It's a secondary emotion. Mine is directly connected to my shame. So wherever I'm not healed in my anger is actually a direct result of the lack of healing I've done in my shame. And so I've gotten very deep and very clear, but do I still trip on my own trash? Do I still get triggered? Absolutely. I just get to neutralize, diffuse, and reconcile a hell of a lot faster. And I'm not creating near the level of damage I used to.
Amazing. Amazing. You know what I learned from Kabbalah that I just think is so appropriate here to share at this moment? Something called the proactive formula. And it goes like this. It's a 5-step process. I'll include it in the show notes for this episode. When a challenging situation or obstacle appears, step 1, pause. Observe your reactive nature. So that's step 1. Step 2, become aware that it is your reaction that is the real enemy, not the person in front of you. They're not the opponent. The opponent is within. And step
Correct.
3 is to realize that the situation is actually coming to you from the light. The creator has brought that to you for you to grow. Step 4,
shine light on what you need to. Yeah.
Step 4, ask the light for help in finding the best proactive solutions to the situation. And then finally, step 5, take that proactive action. Pretty simple, but very profound. I had a little card with this proactive formula on it that I would carry in my wallet for months on end.
Look, that's a universal truth, right? It's a universal truth. That's one of those timeless elements of wisdom that just is truth. I have not heard those 5 steps specifically from the Kabbalah. However, like the reality of it is listen to even what I told you, how I'm helping myself take out my trash real time. Pause, become aware, right? Recognize that it's light pointing me towards what's important, right? And I don't remember the last 2, but the reality of it is right? It's like, what are the lessons I'm supposed to extract? And then how do I become intentional with applying it real time? These are universal truths that exist in the world. And I'm not trying to say that my process is the Kabbalah or any universal truth, but Often we way overcomplicate things. We said that earlier
right.
in this call. And in reality, what we all want is just to be seen and understood and connected. And so what's keeping us from being connected? Ask those right questions. And when you get triggered and you feel these things in your body, pay attention, because it's pointing you towards what's important. And that's one of the things I believe about pain. Pain and perspective both point us at what's important if we're listening.
One of the most painful things that happened to you was when you were age 7, you got run over by that truck. Do you look back at that as having been something that you had signed up for prior to incarnating, that this was something that maybe was part of the plan for this lifetime?
I laughed when you asked, because had you asked me that question 5 years ago, it would have been definitively not, because I don't know that I believed in the full depth of spirits and multiple lives and different things that I've really evolved into as I've put a lot more time and energy into my consciousness work and my spirituality. It's hard for me to accept any other reality than that this is exactly what I was supposed to do with this life. When I look at how things have patterned out and the way they continue to pattern out, I've been protected and promoted by the universe in so many ways. It's just that I was conditioned to believe that I was being tested, right? I was conditioned to believe that I needed to exist in pain, but I didn't allow myself to go inside. It was actually the disconnection of my arm that allowed me to disconnect from my spirit, myself, my soul, probably all understanding on whatever I brought into this world. And that is what my awareness and my intentional consciousness work has been focused on in these last 5 to 10 years, is reconnecting with all of me. It's hard for me to believe that there isn't a deep purpose to every single thing that's happened in my life and continues to. And by the way, I believe that for everybody, right? So when I say this, the thing about my story is, yes, it's highly unique, but every one of us has unique stories. So regardless of the extremities of our stories, what's important is that we pause, there's that first word again, long enough to become aware of the lessons we can extract from our stories, and then become intentional with how we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. And we also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. But I genuinely believe that so many of the things that have happened to all of us are with reason and cause. It's up to us to find the reason and cause and then to apply it moving forward. I can't exist in any other belief, my friend, because I still face struggles. I still feel like garbage. I still struggle with physical pain, right? That I'm very intentional and proactive about. And I could sit here still and wonder why me? Why is all this the case? But what I've recognized is every time I experience pain, every time my pain has led to suffering, it comes out in a way that I can empower so many others to not have to experience the depth of what I have. And the reality of it is, I don't believe that anybody's given something that they can't handle.
Yeah, very true.
I trust that everything that comes my way either is going to determine the end of my time on this planet, in this vessel, in this body, or it's going to be something meaningful for me if I'm patient enough to discover what that is.
What a powerful conversation. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and introspective throughout this conversation. I just love what you're up to in the world.
Well, thank you for one, being a host that actually followed intuition and led to a phenomenal conversation and gave vulnerability to your own audience, which is a really incredible thing because many hosts don't, right? And so, one, I thank you for that. Two, I thank you also for building a platform for me to be able to come together with you so we can pour some good into the world. None of this would have happened without you. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I'm grateful for the way you guided this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, listener. Thank you for being a proactive force for good in the world and being interested in topics like this. So get out there and do some good in the world. We'll catch you on the next episode. In the meantime, have a fantastic week. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.